Hi there readers, it's Chris with Deep Dive Books, the show where a librarian talks about books. It's the spookiest time of year, so I thought I would share some of my favorite spine-tingling tales with you. In this episode, I will not get into Goosebumps because that really is a whole nother can of worms and it deserves its own episode. Let's lead off with my all-time favorite Halloween book, Popcorn by Frank Ash. This book was always in my dentist's office when I was a kid. I read it every single time I went there, from childhood into my early 20s. In fact, when I later switched dentists, I bought a copy of this book for myself on eBay because I loved it so much. I don't think this copy came from a dentist's office, but to this day I can't page through it without getting a phantom whiff of latex and disinfectant. Sam is a little bear child. His negligent parents leave him home alone on Halloween night so they can go out and party. As soon as they leave, Sam dons a culturally insensitive costume and invites all his friends over for a party of their own. Every friend who comes to the party brings a different type of popcorn. The witch brings black cat popcorn, the king brings royal popcorn, then we've got the tiptoe, space dust, spooky tooth, red hot, and walrus blubber varieties of popcorn. Personally, I've always wanted to try spooky tooth popcorn. I'm not sure what it would be like, but I've always imagined it would be something like white cheddar with like bicuspids and stuff. I can't overstate how fascinating these popcorn varieties were to me as a kid. I've always wondered what other types of popcorn you could invent based on other professions or identities. Lawyer, affidavit popcorn. Mechanic, nuts and bolts popcorn. Soldier, ammunition popcorn. Mailman, postage stamp popcorn. IRS agent, taxable income popcorn. Pharmacist, controlled substance popcorn. Well, they toss all the popcorn together in this huge-ass cauldron and it makes so much popcorn that it floods the house. I mean, look at it. The place is bursting at the seams. Suppose you were trapped in a house where every cubic inch of space was filled with popcorn. Would you suffocate? Would you be crushed? Would you be able to eat enough to tunnel your way to a door or window? Or would you become full much too quickly and then just lie there, still basically immobilized until you died of dehydration? These are questions for an episode of Mythbusters, but in Cartoon Bear World it is possible, although gastronomically distressing, for a group of highly motivated youngsters to consume an entire suburban dwelling's worth of popcorn. The party ends and Sam manages to clean up the last remnants of popcorn before dragging himself to bed. Mama and Papa return later that night with a present for Sam. In an ironic twist worthy of an O. Henry short story, that present turns out to be, you guessed it, popcorn. I grew up in a very conservative household, and this was not the kind of book my parents would have wanted me to read. So I didn't. The thing is, there was a copy of this in our house. It's just that no one seemed to know where it had come from. And it's not like it was just sitting on my bedroom bookshelf next to the Berenstain Bears and the Hardy Boys either. It was in this seldom used room in the basement on a shelf full of other tossed aside books. I would go down to that room sometimes and peek into the book, but I could never read more than a few lines at a time before slamming the book shut and charging back up the stairs to safety. I could blame the forbidden nature of the book and the fact I didn't want to get caught by my parents, but the cold truth was, this book was genuinely terrifying. Of course, if you pick up this book for yourself and read it cover to cover, you might not find it quite so scary. It's a collection of old folk tales, urban legends, and poems that anyone over the age of 10 would find quaintly creepy at worst. But wait, you're reading the updated version, aren't you? The one completely re-illustrated by Brett Hellquist? You might recognize his work from A Series of Unfortunate Events. He's a competent illustrator, but his work on scary stories is pretty ho-hum. When you read the updated scary stories, it's like, "Hey kids, are you ready for some spooky tales? Grab some candy corn and get ready for Halloween fun." With respect for Alvin Schwartz, I think the only reason this collection of run-of-the-mill ghost stories made such an impression on a generation of readers was the original artwork of Stephen Gammell. Stephen Gammell was the Caldecott-winning illustrator of such books as Song and Dance Man, The Relatives Came, My Friend the Starfinder, Laugh Out Loud Baby, and many others. There's a friendly, folksy quality to his artwork that creates a charming atmosphere.
Get ready to descend into the bowels of madness as we plumb the depths of mind-shattering terror.
Holy Now I remember why I was so scared of these books. As I read them through the eyes of an adult, I wondered if Gammell hadn't exceeded his mandate, perhaps shocking his publisher with imagery far more gruesome than they had bargained for. But it turns out Alvin Schwartz had the final say over who illustrated his work, a prerogative few authors are granted. And Schwartz insisted on Gammell, almost as if he knew his artwork would be the high-octane nightmare fuel his collection of scary stories called for. As for the stories themselves, the spookiness levels vary. To a kid, sure, some of the stories like The Thing, The Haunted House, and The Wendigo could be pretty scary, but without Gammell's artwork setting the tone, I think this book would be like a 5 out of 10 on the spookometer. These books are all meant to be read aloud, but more than that, they're to be performed. At a sleepover, at a campfire, anywhere you might be able to scare the pants off a group of kids. The funny thing is that most of the stories include stage directions for the reader, explicit prompts telling you when you should try to jump scare your audience. I'm skeptical of how effective these jump scares really are. They seem a bit forced, and some of the stories they accompany aren't that scary to begin with. Here's an example. This story is called The Walk. I'll display the prompt on the screen when it's time for me to scare you. Ready? Here goes. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was also walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was very scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and they came to a big woods. It was getting darker. And the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker. And the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was terrible scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terrible scared of... Did it work? Were you scared? Frightened? If you think my version is bad, consider the alternative. Here's the official audiobook version from HarperCollins.
The man was terrible scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terrible scared of... Ah!
Fair warning, I'm going to sprinkle jump scares like that into the rest of the episode, whether you're ready or not. I'll admit, books 2 and 3 of the Scary Stories collection are markedly more terrifying. The stories One Sunday Morning, The Drum, The Widow, Wonderful Sausage, Oh Susanna, Harold, The Dead Hand, and The Red Spot are legitimately frightening, even without help from the ghoulish illustrations. Scary Stories was the #1 most banned and challenged book in the United States during the 1990s, despite some pretty stiff competition for that title. And it's been in the top 10 as recently as 2012. But you shouldn't get the idea that these are trashy books of wanton violence and devil worship. I mean, yeah, they're called scary stories for a reason, but there's a surprising level of erudition in these volumes. Schwartz sources every tale from folklore and provides an exhaustive bibliography and endnotes explaining the origins, evolutions, and variations of each story. Far from some sicko's grisly idea of an easy paycheck, these books are literature. So why the objections? From what I can gather, the most common beef wasn't so much the content, although there were plenty of complaints about satanic themes, as it was the book's mismatch with their target audience, that is, elementary school children. As a school librarian, this is a quandary that is very familiar to me. It's a delicate situation that requires sound professional judgment. If Scary Stories was a bit too much for you, Alvin Schwartz had at least 2 other collections of spooky tales that were geared toward a decidedly younger audience. In a Dark, Dark Room is a book I first read in 1st grade. It's definitely for 6 or 7-year-olds, but you know what? It's still terrifying. There are 7 short stories and they're filled with decomposing corpses, skeletons, ghosts, and even a decapitation. To me, the green ribbon was always the most chilling tale in this collection. Alfred and Jenny grow up together, fall in love, and get married. All throughout their long life together, Jenny always wears a green ribbon around her neck that she never takes off, but she won't explain why. Finally, terribly ill and lying on her deathbed, Jenny tells Alfred he can untie the ribbon. And then Jenny's head falls off. Dirk Zimmer was the illustrator on this one, and his work doesn't instill the same mind-bending horror as Gamel's, but it's still quite hideous and off-putting. Ew. Ghosts is written for an even younger audience, like maybe kindergartners or babies or something. I've got to level with you, this one really is not scary at all, but Schwartz always did his homework. He cites his sources for both Ghosts and In a Dark, Dark Room, just as he did for Scary Stories. Okay, speed round. Here are some other spooky books I came across while preparing for this episode. Michael Dahl's Really Scary Stories. This is a series in the same vein as Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Each installment comprises a handful of original scary stories. I have to give the author credit, these stories are pretty grisly. Since they're original tales, there is no bibliography or source notes as in Schwartz's Scary Stories, but the author does talk about where he got the idea for each story if you're interested. James Preller's Scary Tales. This series is more akin to Goosebumps, with each book presenting a standalone story. I read book 1, Home Sweet Horror, and again, I have to applaud the author on a job well done. It's reasonably scary, and I dare say better written than Goosebumps. What's more, Goosebumps never contained any illustrations beyond their iconic cover art, but this series does incorporate shadowy, anxiety-inducing artwork to spooktacular effect. The weakness of both these series is their branding. Goosebumps and Scary Stories are iconic, they're cultural touchstones for a generation of readers. Despite my offering both these series in my school library, no child has ever come up to me asking specifically for Michael Dahl's Really Scary Stories or James Preller's Scary Tales. Who's Michael Dahl or James Preller to a 9-year-old? Who cares? A Ghost Named Fred by Nathaniel Benchley has a special place in my heart because, according to my mom, it's the first book I ever read out loud. So this kid named George is playing outside one day and gets caught in the rain. It's getting dark, so he goes up to this house to dry off. Of course, it's a haunted house, and inside he meets a ghost named Fred. Fred is supposed to be guarding some treasure, but he's forgotten where it is, so George helps him look. After tearing the place apart, they find the treasure inside an umbrella. Fred lets George take 1 gold coin as a souvenir, and George slips it in his pocket and goes home. What I love most about this book is its unassuming nature. There's no lesson, no theme. It's not ostentatiously clever or postmodern like so many picture books today. You get the idea by the end that George is going to tell absolutely no one about his adventure. And not because it's scary or unbelievable, but because to him it's no more remarkable than catching a frog or finding a lucky penny. The Vanishing Pumpkin by Tony Johnston and Tommy DePaula. I think I read this book in 1st grade and liked it, but strangely enough, I never thought of it again until just a couple weeks ago when I happened across it in my own school library. Anyway, it's a pretty good book about this old man and woman who discover their prized pumpkin is missing, and they go around threatening people until they discover a wizard has turned it into pumpkin pie, and that makes everyone happy. I like this one. You should read it. Speaking of books I haven't looked at in 30 years or more, rounding out our spooky book list this year is The U-Boats, from a Time Life series called The Seafarers. This may not look like a traditional Halloween book at first glance, but hear me out. And by me, I mean 5-year-old me explaining the book to my grandpa in 1989.
Once upon a time, there was a ship, and there was lots of guys on it. And then one day, big storm came, and then water went onto ship, and boom went the ship, and boom went the ship. There was a news report within the newspaper, and it said, "No chick."
What does that mean?
I don't know. No boats going underwater.
Oh.
And then there was lots of mummy cases underground. See, mummy cases.
What kind of cases?
Mummy cases!
Let me see.
Mummy cases!
Oh, okay. Mummy cases. Okay.
And so the mummy cases wings were open, and then all the mummies came out and said, "Bleh!"
There you have it, the forgotten history of the German U-boat mummies of World War II. Well, that's it for this year's spooky book list. Do you have a favorite scary children's book? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and want to help the channel, be sure to like and subscribe. This is Chris with Deep Dive Books, reminding